Welcome to Mystic Realms Recap. Links are in the description below. Please show some love of the author and me. On to the show. Although Lin Li gained the ability of a legendary mage temporarily due to the all-knowing potion, he was not able to gain any magical domain. He had not been a legendary mage long enough, and thus did not have much opportunity to discover the magic system within him. Yet, it was not the case for that lich. Having lived for 1,300 years, he had plenty of time to understand and explore his magic system and create his personal magical domain. As the lich appeared in front of everybody with his magical domain, Adalo felt totally hopeless. It was a domain which even an ice blast could not break into. How would that young mage Felix have the chance to do so? I have to admit that you are one of a kind that I've never met in these 1,300 years. Your ability to compress the 10 seconds Ice Blast recitation into 1 second would have let you become an esteemed mage 1,300 years ago. Unfortunately, everything is coming to an end. The Ice Blast will be the last spell you are going to cast in your life. The voice of the lich sounded as though it came from hell. Not only was it hoarse and eerie, it was also bone-chilling. The lich was not in a hurry to attack after he established his magical domain in the air. His gaze on Lin Li was cold and penetrating, as though he was trying to have a good look at the appearance of this human whom he had been battling for almost the entire day. He was not in a hurry to attack, because he was confident that victory was already his. The level 18 Ice Blast was one of the most powerful Archmage level spells. Its effects were the closest to legendary level spells if it were to be unleashed. However, one would require a good 10 seconds of recitation to cast such a magnificent spell. A legendary mage would also have to exert a great amount of effort to compress the recitation timing by half. But that human mage actually cast that spell almost instantaneously. To the lich, it was an act of meaningless struggle before death. Only pitiful weaklings who were on the brink of death would see it as the last straw and try to grab onto it desperately. What happened next ascertained the lich's predictions. After casting an ice blast, the mana of that human mage became noticeably unstable. The magical waves around him were unusually violent, like a pot of boiling water. The lich could tell that the depletion of Lin Li's mental strength caused him to lose control over his mana. Mental strength and mana were everything to a mage, and had greater importance than one's mouth and hands. Despite having the mysterious elemental power, a mage would be as useless as a farmer without his hoe once he lost control over them. Although he paid his own price by establishing the magical domain, it was insignificant as compared to the human mage, who lost power over his mana. Unlike that mage who was going to end his life in this cave, a little time was all he needed to recover. Hence, the lich was not worried at all. He hovered in the air quietly, and looked at the human who had forced him out of his magical domain. Hee, the young mage laughed. Underlying the laughter was an incomprehensible sense of calmness. Your magical domain is indeed powerful to be able to counter the ice blast instantaneously. There's nothing unusual. How could lowlifes like humans be able to outperform a true high elf in the field of magic? If the 1,300 years of entrapment did not prevent me from improving my ability in magic, I would have easily smashed you with a finger. Well, then you have to really live for 1,300 years first, Lin Li said as he pursed his lips. He was not intimidated by that lich at all. When he looked at that black figure in the sky, his gaze was not even a little filled with the anxiety brought about by his uncontrollable mana. Alright, Mr. Lich, since we are not magic apprentices anymore, there's no use in acting now. If you'd had the ability to kill me with a finger, I would have been dead by now. Lin Li took a short pause. I'm just curious, why did you establish your magical domain only after I cast the ice blast? He asked smilingly. There was no response. The silence did not matter to Lin Li, as he was not expecting any answer from the lich. Lin Li smiled calmly, and continued his speech. Since Mr. Lich is keeping quiet, let me make a guess myself. The magical domain you had that could allow you to counter the ice blast almost immediately is not as simple as it seems. Being a cautious man, I presume that you had paid a price to establish that domain, and it is not difficult to guess what it was. As mages, The biggest price we have to offer is no doubt mana and mental strength. Since you had the stamina to fight in such an intense battle, you are definitely not lacking in mana. Thus, by elimination, you certainly had used up a great deal of your mental strength in constructing the magical domain. The silence in the cave was deafening. Other than the breathing of the advance party, Lin Li's voice was the only sound. That's right, the ice blast just now caused me to lose control over my mana. But, what about you, Mr. Lich? I suppose that you don't feel well, do you? A great deal of your mental strength has been drained, and you have lost control over your ability as well, am I right? Or else, you would not be chatting with me right now. Ha 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 ha, the Lich broke his silence with a sudden burst of laughter. Human, you are definitely the most powerful human I've met in the 1,300 years of my life. Your ability and intelligence have surpassed any of your fellow species. You're absolutely right in your reasoning. To say the truth, I am still in disbelief that you gathered all that information from mere observation. Mr. Lich, you are too generous with your compliments. Lin Li bowed politely as he thanked the Lich. At once, he put away his smile and turned sarcastic. Now, are you going to say that my luck ends here? He asked. That's right, your luck ends here. Ha 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 ha, replied the Lich as he raised his skeletal staff. When everyone shut their lids hopelessly, that ominous laughter that resembled the cry of an owl stopped abruptly. What followed was a despicable. Then, the 11 members of the advance party witnessed a scene they would remember for life. The master necromancer who had already reached the legendary realm 1,300 years ago and had magnificent magical domain fell down in front of everybody. The terrifying Mr. Lich waved his arms desperately as he fell. His shrieks were bone-chilling. Unfortunately, it did not matter much now. Without the help of magic, any mage, regardless of how invincible he was, would not be able to resist gravity. That was the simplest concept of all. It was the same for a powerful Lich who had broken into the legendary realm as well. Pom! The loud sound reverberated in the cave. That was reality. A Lich who had horrifying abilities would face the same fate as a farmer with a hoe if he were to fall several hundred meters down. The only difference was the scene they would create after they landed onto the ground. While the farmer would spill his blood all over the ground, the Lich's bones broke into fragments and were strewn all over the place. It was as though the world fell silent. At the moment, all 11 members of the advance party did the same thing. They were rubbing their eyes intensely, trying to make sure that everything was not an illusion. Yet, no matter how many times they rubbed their eyes, the sight before them would never change. The impact from the big fall shattered the body of the Lich completely. There were slabs of decayed flesh, piles of moldy bones, and lumps of ghastly white organs. Those were everything left behind by that menacing and powerful Lich who had lived for 1,300 years. Of course, in theory, the Lich was not entirely dead yet. What was gone was just his physical body, while his soul was still intact, well preserved in his life case. Perhaps it would awaken after a few hundred or 1,000 years, and revive the poor Lich who had just experienced an absurd death. Unfortunately, the luck of Mr. Lich was just so bad. Frankly speaking, this Lich was not as clever as Ujfalusi. Unlike Mr. Lich, Ujfalusi had his life case hidden in a place even Lin Li was not aware of. It was, however, obvious that Mr. Lich kept his life case at that altar. Or else, he would not be able to tap into the force of the darkness. Actually, I wanted to inform you that your luck ends here, Lin Li said as he shook his head. It's not nice to steal my lines. Then, Lin Li turned to look at that humorous WYRM that was nearly forgotten by everybody. It was indeed an absurd battle that only appeared in comedy. The thought of how the Lich had fallen to death, and how the humorous WYRM had been forgotten by everyone were like part of the script, all to incite insane laughter in its audience. It was unbelievable indeed. How could a powerful level 20 undead creature be forgotten by everyone? The first impression the humorous WYRM gave was one filled with prestige and pride. Not only did it manage to stir up trouble for an archmage with its ice flames, it nearly killed 10 death knights in the process as well. Unfortunately, after Lin Li had downed the all-knowing potion that gave him the ability of a legendary mage, he'd made the humorous WYRM fall from the sky, and it lost its ability to fly for quite a long time. Then, the battle between legendary mages started. The tempo of the battle was freakish. Even Adalo, who was at the peak of level 17, lost count of the number of the spells cast by the two men. No matter how almighty the Lich was, it could not find a chance to summon the humorous WYRM to help him. Being a summoned creature, the humorous WYRM could only rely on its instinct when the Lich did not give it any instructions in battle. Having lost its ability to fly, the humorous WYRM could only use its instinct to fight. Like a tiger without its teeth, the level 20 undead creature was no match for the group of Death Knights. Hence, things resulted in such an absurdity. Uchvalusi, are you interested in this fella? Lin Li asked the necromancer as he rubbed his nose. His casual tone made it sound as though that was not a humorous WYRM, but some carrots that were left on the road. Lin Li's arrogance was not unjustifiable. The humorous WYRM now was definitely no different from carrots. Although its powers were formidable, it could only use them when it was summoned by the Lich. It was certainly an invincible level 20 undead creature when it was alive, but now that the Lich had died, it lost its right to live as well. It was no laughing matter. When the contract lost its functionality, the summoned WYRM would either get lucky and be sent back where it was summoned, or could only wait for its soul fire to go out. Most importantly, the humorous WYRM would lose its support with the death of the Lich. Until it established another pact with a new necromancer, it would be weaker than the lowest-ranking skeletal warrior. The humorous WYRM was like a wallet that somebody dropped. Any necromancer would be able to pick it up if they wanted to bend their back. If Uchvalusi had the interest, Lin Li was very willing to let him pick it up. Thank you, master, but there's no need to do that. Why? Asked Lin Li. He did not expect that. It's like this, master. I'm only one step away from level 19, and my ability would be back to normal in a year's time. Uchvalusi hesitated, and glanced at Lin Li. If you allow it, I hope to help Crimson create a new body. Oh. Uchvalusi was referring to that humorous WYRM which was destroyed by the holy light when they were at the ruins of Sire Town. According to Uchvalusi, Crimson had a powerful WYRM crystal that was mightier than Uchvalusi himself. Since Lin Li had that WYRM crystal with him, it was not difficult for Uchvalusi to create another body for Crimson. As long as Uchvalusi could recover his original ability, he could use that crystal to create a humorous WYRM that looked exactly like Crimson. No problem with that. I will pass that magical crystal to you when we get back. Thank you, master. Hee, Lin Li smiled. He did not feel that he was at any disadvantage by giving the WYRM crystal to Uchvalusi at all, as it was still a profit to be able to garner the loyalty of a Lich in return. Furthermore, the contract Uchvalusi had signed with him was one that forbade any form of betrayal. The humorous WYRM under Uchvalusi's control would be as good as his. The only thing that troubled Lin Li was the humorous WYRM in front of him. What should he do with it? Uchvalusi was the only necromancer there. If he had no intention to bend his back, no one else would have the right to do it. But that was a level 20 undead creature. Any necromancers who were to sign a summon contract with it would have their combat capability raised to a whole new level. Lin Li could not expect himself to be so vexed over the meat pie that fell from the sky. How could he let this huge wallet vanish just like that? Norfeller, you, Lin Li called out to him, but held himself back quickly. Forget it. The thought of the blood oath he had with Norfeller reminded Lin Li that Norfeller would not be able to sign a similar contract anymore. As the Lich's magical wave grew fainter, the remaining force allowing one to summon the humorous WYRM became weaker as well. Lin Li could sense that the energy within the WYRM was depleting at rocket-like speed. He knew that it might vanish from the earth any time soon. God damn it, it is hard to leave that wallet there just like that. Yeah, what a torture. That was a voice that rang in Lin Li's head. F***CKU, Canoris. You are such a shameless peeping Tom. Did I not warn you not to ever peep again? Do you really hope to be thrown into the furnace? Lin Li cussed angrily. That bastard is getting more and more perverted these days. In the past, Canoris only attempted to use his mental strength to communicate with Lin Li. Now, did he just use it to peep at Lin Li's thoughts? Damn this spiritual communication. If this continues, Canoris is going to dig all my dark secrets out. You're too rude. Don't forget that you are speaking to the almighty soul trader. Unlike before, Lin Li's threats did not terrify Canoris this time. This demonic soul that had been around for God knew how many years did not seem to sense Lin Li's rage. Not just that, I have a solution for this difficult situation as well. Can't you show me some respect? Damn you soul tr, Lin Li wanted to cuss, but he held himself back with an ingratiating smile. Almighty soul trader, do you really have a way? Of course, snapped Canoris, that's great. Almighty soul trader, your wisdom and intelligence certainly make you the role model of all abyssal demons. I believe no legendary demon lords would be comparable to you. Since you are a forgiving man, can you advise me on what to do? Canoris finally replied after all the flattery. Alright, since you are so sincere, I shall bless you with some advice. Yes, please continue. Since that necromancer is the only one who has the right to sign a summon contract with the humorous WYRM, you can stop thinking about that, Canoris scoffed. But, the contract is not the only solution. Did you forget that you still have an oil lamp created personally by Osric in that weird dimension? You are referring to the oil lamp that sealed the Lord of Nightmares? That's right. But, Lin Li hesitated. Wasn't that oil lamp used to seal the Lord of Nightmares? Who told you that an oil lamp could only seal one thing? I was there with Osric when he created this lamp. He even consulted me about the characteristics of souls. Lin Li nearly burst out laughing. The sales pitch of the trader was so eloquent that he remembered to replace the word interrogate with consult. Almost everybody thought that Osric created the 12 lamps just to seal the 12 demon lords. How would they know what that crazy fella had in mind? That lunatic once told me his intention was to put the entire abyss into these oil lamps. Lin Li took a deep breath. Osric nearly used up all the things he won from the abyssal battle when he was creating the 12 oil lamps. Each of them could seal unlimited number of demons and undead creatures. Are the 12 lamps that powerful? Are you talking crap? Canoris snorted. Let me tell you another secret, then. Osric's motive behind the creation of the 12 lamps was to turn them into one of the most powerful weapons of the eternal furnace. If not for the early death of that madman, the High Elves might have had the 8th Sky Castle. Or else, how could you humans defeat the High Elves so easily and dominate Amrel? Weapons? Do you mean that the 12 oil lamps are exactly part of the eternal furnace? Of course, did you just assume that that madman had no better things to do, and just wanted to go to the abyss for an expedition? Although Canoris told him the secret in a very calm manner, Lin Li was still utterly stunned by it. Lin Li had entered the eternal furnace before, and seen for himself the freaky infernal palace which hovered in the air. No one could be clearer than Lin Li about it. And that was still an incomplete eternal furnace. If what Canoris said was true, if the eternal furnace were to recover its prime condition, and be integrated with the 12 oil lamps that had the demon lords sealed within them, it would definitely turn into the 8th Sky Castle. Lin Li could only agree with the view that Osric was indeed a crazy man. This was the only title that suited that talented High Elves. While the High Elves only managed to construct 7 Sky Castles after countless years, Osric had the ability to almost complete one by himself. Oh, yes. Almighty Soul Trader, you haven't advised me on the way to deal with that humorous WYRM. To be honest, it is really your luck to have met me. Since I witnessed the entire process when Osric created the 12 lamps, I'm confident to say that I'm the person that has the best understanding of the 12 lamps. It is very simple to seal that humorous WYRM. All you need is a recital. Kenora said a recital in the High Elf's language. Perhaps it had been long since he heard it, for he stuttered along the way, and was not very clear at certain parts of the recital. Fortunately, it had been over a year since Lin Li came to the Emerald World. He was well versed in the High Elf's language now, and had developed deep insight from the 10 core magical mantras. It was not difficult for him to analyze any magical recitation. Lin Li memorized the recital in less than a minute. Along the way, he did not forget to correct Kenora's mistakes in pronouncing certain parts of the recital. Very good. Almighty Soul Trader, you must be tired now. Why don't you go back to take a rest? We will discuss politeness and respect when we get back to the Tower of Dusk. With that, Lin Li cut off the spiritual communication between Kenoris and himself immediately. Despicable. That was the only word Kenoris managed to say before the mental strength was disrupted. Politeness and respect? I'm going to settle the deal with you after getting back, Lin Li muttered in irritation as he walked towards the humorous Wyrm. Now, the magical wave of the Lich was incredibly weak. If he was not an archmage, Lin Li would not be able to sense such a minute magical wave. The humorous Wyrm had been forced into a corner by the surviving Death Knights who had ceased their attacks. When Lin Li got to the Wyrm, it was incredibly weak. Its gold skeletal structure was whitewashed like any other skeletal warriors. There was no sign on the poor Wyrm that suggested it was a level 20 undead creature. Pitiful would be the most adept descriptor for the Wyrm's remaining energy, and this pathetic amount was depleting at the speed of light. The humorous Wyrm continued to struggle. Its voice that sounded from the cave lacked the usual power. It was as though it was a low-level magical beast, whimpering before its death. I found a new place for you to live. Lin Li took out the lamp from his ring of endless storm, and started the recitation. As the huge chunks of High Elf's language came out from his mouth, the level 15 magical crystal etched in the oil lamp glistened as well. It emitted a gentle white ray of light, which grew brighter as the seconds trickled past. It gradually lit up the entire cave. Under that white light, the limp humorous Wyrm suddenly stood up energetically. Its 10 meters long tail brushed against the ground and swept up a large amount of dust in the air. Its loud roar nearly led Lin Li into thinking that the menacing level 20 beast had returned. But, after that roar, the humorous Wyrm lowered its head unwillingly, like a gentle and obedient kitten. It soaked itself in the white light and let its body fade into it. Oh my goodness, gasped Adelo. He should be the only person out of the entire advance party who knew what the sight before them meant. It meant that the young mage had not only defeated the Lich, but also took over his summoned creature, a level 20 humorous Wyrm. Adelo could not believe what he had seen. Who would dare to challenge that young mage if he could summon that beast? This is too frightening. I must tell Hutton to remind everyone from the Manhwa family not to find trouble with this freak. Oh, yes. There's Harvey too. I remember that Harvey had a conflict with him before we set off. Hope this doesn't create any trouble for the Manhwa family. While Adelo was still trembling, Lin Li had completed his seal on the humorous Wyrm. The oil lamp in Lin Li's hands did not seem to look any different after it sealed the humorous Wyrm. It had the same antique appearance that resembled an aristocrat's teapot. The only thing that changed was the level 15 magical crystal on top of the lamp that seemed to have used up a great amount of mana to produce that white light. Lin Li could sense that there was not a lot of mana left in the crystal even though it had been socketed in the lamp only a few days ago. This lamp is good, it just drains too much mana, Lin Li muttered unbearably as he thought of the hefty sum he'd paid for the level 15 magical crystal. It was good that he rarely got a chance to seal things. Otherwise, he would not have enough money to sustain such high usage. After the Lich shattered into pieces, and the humorous Wyrm got sealed up by the lamp, the ominous and eerie cave became clean and ordinary again. Nobody could smell any scent of decay when the cold wind blew past occasionally. Lin Li led the group of men who had yet to recover from their shock across the piles of rubble and towards the altar. Their journey there was incredibly peaceful, without any more interruptions from the undead creatures. Yet, Lin Li was not at peace with himself. In fact, he was boiling with excitement. Lin Li knew that he was getting closer and closer to gloomy dark. Now that the lich had fallen to death, and he had sealed the humorous WYRM up, there would not be anything that could prevent him from acquiring gloomy dark. That was the best thing he had discovered at the Scar of Death. The humorous WYRM sealed in his lamp was insignificant as compared to acquiring gloomy dark. Gloomy dark and holy light owned the two purest forces in the world, darkness and light, respectively. To others, they were just two sets of powerful magical weapons. To the formal owner of the Stars of Fury, however, they had the potential to generate an invincible amount of energy. Not to exaggerate, even if he was a weakling, as long as he were to get his hands on both gloomy dark and holy light, he would certainly become unrivaled in the legendary realm. It's been long, gloomy dark, Lin Li mumbled as he stopped in his tracks 10 meters away from the altar. That altar was indeed a masterpiece of the High Elves. It was constructed entirely of moonstone, which produced a gentle glow in the dark. The entire altar was 30 meters tall. It was not much smaller than the gigantic humorous WYRM. It looked like a tall tower with a pointed roof, and its summit had a moonstone sculpture of a high elf from the waist up. The unique, magical wave of gloomy dark seemed to be emitted by that half-bodied sculpture. That. Lin Li gasped. His suspicion rose as he saw the face of the high elf sculpture. Although it had the eyes and ears like any other high elves, it just looked too familiar. Lin Li cast the warlock's eyes skeptically. As the warlock's eyes approached the sculpture, Lin Li had a closer view of its face. However, despite the clear sight thereof, Lin Li just could not recall where he saw someone who resembled this high elf. Damn it, did it appear in my dreams? Lin Li shook his head helplessly. Just when he was about to give up on further investigation and get his hands on gloomy dark straight away, he heard Ujfalusi's gasp. Master, that's the immortal king. Huh? Lin Li exclaimed in surprise. You mean, that half-bodied statue depicts the immortal king? That's right, Ujfalusi replied. The mentioning of the legendary figure of the High Elves dynasty terrified Ujfalusi. He even swallowed his saliva like a real human when he looked at that half-bodied statue in awe. Lin Li glanced at the statue resting on the summit of the pointed tower and froze for a few minutes. When he regained his composure, vulgar words exited his mouth. F***ck, why is it that bastard again? Lin Li could not help it. The name Immortal King had become a curse ever since the finals in the Aurora Square. It was like an annoying spirit that continued to haunt him wherever he went. From the Aurora Square to the Demon Fall Valley, and from Dulan to the Scar of Death, Immortal King's name came up everywhere. Even Ujfalusi, whom he had signed the soul contract with, seemed to have some connection with that bastard. Although Ujfalusi did not tell him anything about the Immortal King, it did not mean Lin Li was totally unaware of it. The soul contract Ujfalusi signed with Lin Li was one which forbade secrecy. The moment the bond was established, fragments of Ujfalusi's memory were transmitted to Lin Li's mind. Although Lin Li could not gather much useful information from those disorganized fragments, he saw the shadow of the Immortal King in them. Since Ujfalusi did not reveal any details about the Immortal King to him, Lin Li knew it had to be something that could pose a threat to Ujfalusi. Hence, Lin Li still did not ask Ujfalusi about it. That's right, it's this altar. Adalo exclaimed excitedly, and was unable to repress his joy. But the next moment, Adalo was looking at Lin Li in hesitation. Mage Felix, could we have a talk? Of course, Lin Li replied after glancing at Adalo. He knew very well what that archmage from the Manhwa family had to say. The lies about wanting to destroy the altar earlier on were all a child's play. How could his ultimate goal be destroying the altar when he agreed to bring a group of people into the Scar of Death tirelessly in hopes of finding the altar that was located deep within the cave? Lin Li would be a moron to believe those words. But, he welcomed Adalo's invitation to talk. How could Adalo have zero knowledge of the altar he took so much risk to locate? His mentor, Cheyenne, was the one who'd personally come to the altar that year to battle the Lich. If one were to say that Adalo was ignorant of that altar, Lin Li would be the first person to get suspicious. In fact, Lin Li had planned out what to do long before Adelo spoke. Since what he wanted from the beginning was just the gloomy dark, he did not mind knowing more secrets from Adelo, and then negotiating the splitting of benefits. Of course, if Adelo wanted the gloomy dark like he did, it would be another story. I'm guessing Mage Felix would know that my main motive of entering the Scar of Death is not to destroy this altar, Adelo admitted to his lie immediately. Lin Li laughed, and did not say anything. Yet, he was secretly shocked. When did this dude, who has been disguising himself as a magic shooter, become so straightforward with his words? Lin Li would not have guessed that Adelo was actually governed by his fear when he spoke to him. That was right. Adelo was indeed scared. Adelo's fear of the young mage grew as they survived the different battles that seemed to increase in difficulty as they journeyed towards the Scar of Death. How would anyone have the guts to lie to a young mage who made 10 Death Knights submit to him, had the ability of a legendary mage to defeat the Lich, and had skills to seal a humorous WYRM? It might have cost him his life. Actually, I wasn't entirely lying when I said that just now, I just forgot to say some details. When I went into the cave with my mentor that year, I really lost my consciousness. He only told me what happened in the cave after I woke up again, Adelo said defensively. That year, my mentor indeed battled with the Lich. But, according to him, there wasn't any humorous WYRM in the cave. Hence, he had an advantage when he battled the Lich. At the end of the battle, my mentor sacrificed a level of his ability to inflict great harm onto the Lich. Oh? Lin Li could not help but feel surprised. He was extremely well aware of the ability of the Lich. Not to exaggerate, having received the most formal education in magic, the Lich was almost perfect in his combat techniques. He made 0 mistakes in his tactics, and his life case that was safely stowed in the altar allowed him to absorb unlimited amount of force produced by the gloomy dark. Hence, it was extremely difficult to battle an opponent who had never-ending supply of mana like him. Lin Li knew very well that the all-knowing potion could only give him the powers of a legendary mage, temporarily. It was not sufficient for him to defeat such a terrifying Lich. The victory he'd got unexpectedly was all due to that crimson crystal. The devouring force within it allowed him to create a vacuum for the reckless Lich to fall from the air like that. Otherwise, Lin Li would be the one who had his body ripped into pieces instead. But, the mentor Adelo was telling him had to be something. How could anyone have the ability to sacrifice a level of his ability to critically injure a Lich? That was even more powerful than him downing a bottle of the all-knowing potion himself. It seemed that there was still a difference between legendary mages. Lin Li knew he would only figure out that difference after he reached the legendary realm. My mentor has been telling me that he had committed a grave mistake in that battle. That was, using a spell to restrict the Lich instead of destroying his body completely. This mistake is really serious. Lin Li knew it meant trouble. That was because my mentor found the altar located deep within the cave at the same time. Adelo recalled the story with very complicated feelings. This fault made him regret for decades. If not for his carelessness, it would not lead to the subsequent consequences, and delay his breakthrough into level 21 by 10 years. Adelo sighed. However, it was no doubt natural for Mentor to feel anxious then. I believe anyone would have done the same thing if he had discovered the huge secret within the cave. It seems that Mage Adelo wants to tell me about the secret hidden within this altar now. Yes, said Adelo. My mentor went into a historical building owned by the High Elves, and got to know that the Scar of Death has this altar and about the great secret hidden within it. This secret is related to the Immortal King. Immortal King? I presume you should have read many articles written during the High Elves dynasty. Don't you realize that those articles barely mention the Immortal King? Even if there is information that might be related to him, it's only mentioned vaguely as though the author was trying to avoid the topic. For the parts that speak of the king, they were mixed with too many rumors and hearsay. 1,300 years had gone by, and the only thing people of Amril knew of him was just that he was the creator of the entire High Elves dynasty. Mage Adelo, this means you know a lot about that Immortal King? Since what I know of him is all stories my mentor told me, it would be an overstatement to say that I understand him well. I believe there would only be a handful of people in the entire Anril who would know the immortal king well. My mentor found a diary that belonged to a high elf royal in that historical building. On the last few pages of the diary, this royal mentioned that his grandfather was actually one of the servants working under the immortal king. In fact, the establishment of the High Elves dynasty transformed the servants of the immortal king into prominent aristocrats. Many truths about that age gradually disappeared in the river of time. The owner of the diary only found out about the immortal king while he was tidying his grandfather's relics. Apart from this secret, his grandfather left him 2 other relics, a crossbow with a strange energy as well as a map that was said to lead to infinite amount of treasures. It seems that treasure map is not an ordinary one, then. Yes, admitted Adelo, but did not go further with the topic. Instead, he continued the story from earlier. The diary was blank for around a period of 3 months. My mentor only knew what happened in that 3 months after reading the contents afterward. It was just the High Elf Royal trying to find the treasure on the map tirelessly, but there was no mention of the progress. Yet, from the tone and information written after the 3-month gap, my mentor found out that this royal appeared to become crazily interested in necromagic. He used at least 10 pages to narrate how he studied different types of necromagic, and how he built a secret ground with the other royals in a canyon. While he talked about those things, he repeated a certain phrase in particular. What phrase? We are going to inherit the immortal king's business. What sort of crap is that? Lin Li commented in disappointment. He'd been expecting that he would hear some secrets. Did that royal burn his mind while studying necromagic? Hee, I remember that my mentor said the same thing as Mage Felix when he told me that phrase. What else? After that, the war started. The royal high elves researching in the secret grounds put aside their work and led their team into battle. Unfortunately, Lady Luck was not on their side when they met Juresco during their first battle. The last part of the diary was written in his last breath. When he got here, Adelo smiled. These divine-like high elves really resembled us humans when they were on the edge of deaths. It is evident from his tone and words that he had already fallen apart mentally before he died. He reiterated in a hysterical and frenzied state at the end of the diary that Juresco was the immortal king. It seems like Mr. Royal was really petrified, Lin Li laughed with Adelo. The immortal king and Juresco was one high elf and one human being, respectively, who had lived 1,000 years apart from each other. Furthermore, the immortal king was the creator of the High Elves dynasty, while Juresco was the destroyer of the High Elves dynasty. If it was what that royal said, that Juresco was the immortal king, how different could that battle be from a fight between a left and a right hand? Lin Li was more interested in the other contents of the diary as compared to that absurd story. Mage Adelo is saying that the crossbow with special powers and that map to infinite treasures are both hidden in this altar? Yes. This was the reason why my mentor was so hasty after defeating the Lich. Having read the diary, he was clearer than anybody in Anril world that the treasure left behind by the immortal king was no jewelry, riches, valuable resources, or any rare magical equipment. According to the diary, it was a treasure that would make the entire Anril world crazy over it. It was said that in this treasure, there was a passageway that would lead one to heaven. Anyone who obtained the treasure would acquire unlimited strength and even become a living god. After hearing the long story, Lin Li did not give an immediate reply. He lifted his head to gaze upon the tall standing tower, and filtered through every single detail in the story. I want to hear Mage Adelo's views, Lin Li said as he glanced at Adelo after a good 10 minutes of silence. Ha ha ha, Adelo suddenly laughed upon hearing that. His laughter was one which was full of relief. Adelo had been waiting for that question. Frankly speaking, Adelo was very afraid that the young mage had the intention to take everything. He had no choice too, although the team 12 men strong was sent by the Manhwa family. The person with authority would only be the young mage who defeated the Lich single-handedly. Anril world was like that. The right to speak would always belong to whoever had a larger fist. At the beginning, Adelo had thought that his fists were the largest. He'd thought that a level 17 archmage and 2 high-ranking level 17 warriors were enough to defeat that Lich injured greatly by his mentor. He thought he could silence all the other members in the advance party upon completing the mission. Adelo absolutely did not expect things to progress so out of place. Not only had the Lich recovered his ability early, the humorous WYRM he'd summoned was a problem as well. The most absurd thing was, when he thought he could treat the other members in the advance party as cannon fodder, there suddenly appeared a mage in the legendary realm. It was like a nightmare. How could a well-prepared plan be destroyed by so many accidents like this? To be honest, if this young mage had the intention to keep everything for himself, Adelo would have no ability to go against him. How could Adelo survive a battle as horrifying as the one earlier? Adelo had everything to believe that that young mage could kill him with just a finger, not to forget that the dude sealed a humorous WYRM right after the battle. If he really wanted to keep everything for himself, summoning that humorous WYRM to attack them would suffice. It was already a blessing for this young mage to be willing to discuss the matter with himself. Otherwise, he really did not know how to get back to Mentor Cheyenne. "Look, Mage Felix," Adelo called Lin Li cautiously. "Can you let me make a copy of the treasure map afterward? I need to bring it back to Mentor Cheyenne." "No problem," replied Lin Li generously. He agreed without any hesitation. "Why you? You really mean it?" The swift reply gave Adelo a shock. He actually readied himself with a script in his mind to persuade the young mage. He was even prepared to help his mentor to promise some benefits given by the Manhwa family, just to exchange for a chance to obtain a copy of the treasure map from him. It was already a blessing for this young mage to be willing to discuss the matter with himself. Otherwise, he really did not know how to get back to Mentor Cheyenne. "Look, Mage Felix," Adelo called Lin Li cautiously. "Can you let me make a copy of the treasure map afterward? I need to bring it back to Mentor Cheyenne." "No problem," replied Lin Li generously. He agreed without any hesitation. "Why you? You really mean it?" The swift reply gave Adelo a shock. He actually readied himself with a script in his mind to persuade the young mage. He was even prepared to help his mentor to promise some benefits given by the Manhwa family, just to exchange for a chance to obtain a copy of the treasure map from him. After all, it was a wholly different concept for a treasure map to be owned by a single man instead of two. If another man were to find the treasure first, the map in his hands would become a piece of trash immediately. Adelo hadn't expected that he would not at all need to use his script for the young mage to nod his head in approval. He was dumbfounded for quite a while, and even asked a very stupid question. "Can you tell me why?" "Because I need a partner to collaborate with me." "What do you mean?" "It is still too early to say anything now. I'll head to Aminya City in person to look for Master Cheyenne after the Blackstone Mountains mission," replied Lin Li. Then, he glanced at the peak of the tower. "For now, I think we should think of a way to retrieve the crossbow and map from the altar." Yeah, Lin Li's words reminded Adelo of his original plan. Adelo turned to call Jonathan over. "Mr. Jonathan, you can take out the thing Butler Han entrusted you with." Jonathan froze for a moment before he began to flip his pockets in a hurry. After a while, he took out the 6 black magical crystals from a close-fitting pocket. "You mean, these?" "Yes, Mr. Jonathan. Now, I need your help." Adelo reached out his finger and pointed at the half-bodied statue on the tip of the tower. "Please climb to the top and place these crystals on that statue. I will use magical markings to show you exactly where to arrange them." "All right," replied Jonathan obediently. He asked no further questions, and started to walk towards the stairs with the 6 magical crystals in his hands. Wait, Lin Li woke up from his daze when he noticed Jonathan was about to head up the steps. "Stop there. What's wrong?" "Look at this," Lin Li said as he directed the 2 men's attention to one of the moonstones. "Do you know what this pattern means?" Jonathan was not alone. Even Adelo, who had more experience, could not tell what Lin Li wanted to tell them. He stared in the direction where Lin Li's finger pointed for quite a while. "Mage Felix, what's so special about this pattern?" "Of course there's nothing special about this pattern. But look, this is not the only one here. In fact, each and every moonstone has a different pattern carved on it, and that makes them extremely dangerous. The situation at the altar was just like what Lin Li said. Every moonstone had a unique and delicately carved design, which might appear to be no more than an extravagant decoration to ordinary eyes. To a guru of inscription, however, it was an entirely different story. If Lin Li was right, the 13 patterns would form a ManhwaRecap array when they were joined together. Even Lin Li's expression changed after he had analyzed all 13 of the ManhwaRecaps. This was definitely the work of a guru, and was comparable to the all-kill array of the Tower of Dusk. In fact, it was even more cleverly designed than the all-kill array. The 13 ManhwaRecaps encompassed decay, gravity, deadly poison, fear, hallucinations, seduction, and the dark. Under the control of the ManhwaRecap array, these 7 different kinds of energy were able to take on any formation and become frighteningly powerful. Moreover, the ManhwaRecap array relied on the gloomy dark as a source of mana. In other words, the 13 ManhwaRecaps were able to directly absorb energy from the gloomy dark. That was the highlight of the entire ManhwaRecap array in Lin Li's opinion. This was because the gloomy dark was the purest form of dark force in the world, and thus, the 13 ManhwaRecaps could just use the absorbed energy directly without having to convert it into another form. This meant that there would never be a risk of mana exhaustion. Impressive, as a true guru of inscription himself, Lin Li knew better than anyone else that in terms of ManhwaRecap design, it was much harder to harness the strength of a mana source the more powerful this source was. Take Lin Li for example. The biggest problem he'd encountered while designing the all-kill array was not how to balance the 10 unique ManhwaRecaps, but how to integrate the all-kill array into the power system of the legendary magical crystal. It was hard enough with one legendary magical crystal, but what about the gloomy dark that was much more powerful? Seems like Osric was not the only genius in the once unparalleled and glamorous dynasty. Lin Li was staring so intently at the ManhwaRecap on the moonstone that Adalo could not help but ask, "Mage Felix, why are you? Do you still have summoning scrolls?" "I do." Adalo paused in surprise, before he searched his pockets and retrieved a white summoning scroll. "But I'm only left with the one used to summon the three-eyed demon wolf. Those above level 15 have already been used against the skeletal warriors. I wonder if..." "It's fine." Lin Li shook his head as he took the three-eyed demon wolf summoning scroll, and gently tore the seal in the middle. The summoning scroll immediately turned into a puff of smoke, and the blurry outline of a three-eyed demon wolf appeared. Lin Li could not be bothered to wait until the smoke dissipated, hence, he only used his mental strength to give a command. "Go down the stairs." The three-eyed demon wolf was merely a low-ranking magical beast, after all, and with its pathetic intelligence, it did not understand how scary the altar was. Hence, Lin Li had barely given his command before the three-eyed demon wolf rushed down the stairs. "Mage Felix, what are you?" Adalo had just started speaking when black fog engulfed the surroundings of the altar. While the fog was not too thick, it did loom over the place. Then, it was followed by the cry of the three-eyed demon wolf from within the black fog. Everyone besides Lin Li was stunned by the cry, as they would never have thought that the altar that had been abandoned for over 1,300 years would have such terrifying traps hidden within. Jonathan was especially affected as he broke out into cold sweat. If Mage Felix had not stopped him earlier, it would have been him letting out the cry instead. "I understand." Adalo stared at the altar with a pale face and evident fear in his eyes. "So my teacher has been wrong all this time." He always thought that it was the lich attacking him, but to think that it was a trap within the altar itself. "This trap is called the ManhwaRecap array," Lin Li said with a smile, but did not continue explaining how powerful the ManhwaRecap array was. There was no way he could do that anyway. There were less than 10 people in the world of Amril that understood the concept of a ManhwaRecap array, and of course neither Adalo nor his teacher were part of those 10. No matter how he explained it to him, there was no chance of Adalo getting it. Moreover, Lin Li had more important matters to see to now. It was true, the person who designed the ManhwaRecap array was a genius indeed, and even Lin Li did not think he would be able to come up with such a cleverly designed ManhwaRecap array. But, even if he was not able to come up with it, it did not mean that he could not replicate it. Once an inscriber reached the realm of a guru, there was not much difference in abilities. The only difference lay in whether or not one was able to think of it. As long as he copied down the mage array, he would be able to replicate it perfectly after studying it for a couple of days at most. Ujfalusi, you have half an hour to copy down the patterns on this. Alright, master. Ujfalusi finished copying after half an hour, and Lin Li raised his ether staff as he slowly walked over to the altar. Everyone, stand back. Lin Li started chanting after he warned them. It was still a pyroblast, and was still executed so fast that it had been nearly instantaneous. Boom. Large fireballs were hurled against the surface of the altar with a bang. Amidst the blindingly bright flames, large pieces of moonstone flew out, a hole was blown in the mage array. Then there were 2 and 3, until the number reached 13. Lin Li used 13 pyroblasts, and blew 13 holes in the altar. If there were other inscribers here, they would be cursing angrily because the 13 pyroblasts were aimed exactly at the core circuits of the 13 mageweths. In other words, the 13 pyroblasts completely destroyed this ingenious mageweth array. Alright, Brother Jonathan, you can go ahead. Okay, Jonathan nodded his head, and headed up the stairs with the 6 black magical crystals. Under the guidance of Adalo's magical marker, he quickly lodged the 6 black magical crystals in appropriate positions. After the last black magical crystal was lodged into position, the entire cave seemed to become clear. The oppressive and annoying weak magical wave seemed to have been stopped by a mysterious force, and they could no longer feel it. Even Lin Li could feel that the holy light in the ring of endless storm had stopped pulsating, and lay quietly and peacefully instead of its earlier restlessness. These 6 black magical crystals were left behind by the high elven royals, and were said to have come from an ancient magical beast. The only thing special about them is that they have an insane ability to devour mana, and even an archmage at their peak will have their mana depleted in an instant. Hence, I had Mr. Jonathan hold on to them. Besides, it is written in the High Elven Royal's diary that the bolt in the altar has a strange energy that could only be suppressed by these 6 black magical crystal. Now, we can safely retrieve the treasure map. As the 6 black magical crystals were devouring the mana, Adalo patiently explained things to Lin Li. The nearer they got to the treasure map within the altar, the more careful Adalo became, as he was very afraid that he might do something to cause a misunderstanding between him and the young mage. Adalo was well aware that any misunderstanding that might arise now would not only hurt him, but also the entire Manhwa family. Alright, Mage Felix, let's head up. Only when the aura of the gloomy dark completely disappeared did Adalo and Lin Li head up the stairs. The process of retrieving the belongings of the royal was simple, as the gloomy dark was held in the left hand of the immortal king sculpture, while the treasure map that Adalo spoke of was a yellowed piece of sheepskin lying next to the immortal king sculpture. Adalo was so emotional that his hands trembled when he picked up the treasure map from beside the immortal king. This was the key to the immortal king's treasures, and there was more than endless wealth in it. There were also instructions on how to achieve the greatest strength, and once he was able to get a hold of that, there was a chance that he might reach the legendary realm in his lifetime, perhaps even reaching the peak of the sanctuary realm. It's been a while, gloomy dark. Lin Li's hands were trembling slightly too. He already held 2 out of the 7 debris of the stars, one light, and the other was the dark. If he was able to use them well, the light and dark would become his most powerful strength, and now that he had both the light and the dark, it would be much easier for him to search for the rest, as the debris of the stars resonated with each other, so he would no longer have to wait until he was in the vicinity of one of them to detect its presence. It was only a matter of time before he found the other 5 pieces of the debris of the stars. Lin Li exerted a huge amount of effort before he finally managed to calm himself down. Then, he gingerly reached out with his still trembling right hand, and took the gloomy dark from the hand of the immortal king's sculpture. Now that the 6 black magical crystals were no longer devouring its mana, the strength of the gloomy dark was released immediately. It was powerful and profound, just like the dark itself. Lin Li held it in his hand as he savored this familiar force. In that moment, it felt as though he was back in the endless world. By then, the Manhwa family's team had already crossed the Scar of Death, and set up a campsite in the vast plains. The team seemed entirely different from when they left, as they had not only been replaced with many elites from the Manhwa family, but they had also gained a few powerful allies. There were the Sire Bandits, that ranked in the top 10 in the Breezy Plains, as well as the High Priest of the Darkness Shrine, Sendros. Frankly speaking, Hutton was taken by surprise when he heard that Sendros was coming, as even though the Darkness Shrine could no longer rival the Brilliant Shrine, Sendros was still a powerful individual who stood at the peak of magic. Hutton had long heard from his teacher how scary a necromancer in the legendary realm could be. Of course, Hutton was aware that the Manhwa family was definitely incapable of hiring someone like Sendros, and the only reason he was here was because his teacher had got acquainted with him in the past. Hence, Hutton was exceptionally hospitable towards Sendros in these days, and arranged a luxurious tent for him. He also personally brought Sendros his meals, and was incredibly respectful to him when he spoke. One thing was certain: the first heir of the Manhwa family was definitely gifted in some ways, as he could interact very well with whoever it was. Even the gruff Sendros occasionally gave a stiff smile when he spoke to Hutton. The tent that Hutton set up for Sendros was in the center of the campsite, and looked luxurious and spacious. Soft, warm carpets lined the floor of the tent, while the furniture was crafted by well-known masters. It was like walking into the Emperor's moving palace. When they walked into the tent, it was hard to imagine that this was in the middle of the Blackstone Mountains with their hostile environment. The only bad thing was that it was too empty. There was only a black-robed Sendros in the big tent. Besides Hutton, who brought him his meals every day, nobody was willing to go near the tent. It was because this legendary mage had a naturally chilly aura, and even the ruthless head of bandits, Vanskor, could not help but tremble in front of Sendros. He had wanted to establish a good relationship with this legendary mage the first day he arrived, but after that, this ruthless head of bandits found himself regretting his decision for a good couple of days. That feeling was too scary. He was a short and skinny old man. Besides having a title of legendary mage, there was nothing out of the ordinary about him. However, one could feel a chilly aura seeping into their bones simply by standing in front of him, which felt like falling into an ice cellar and feeling your blood freeze up. The scariest part, however, was his eyes. Vanskor felt as though there was a venomous snake staring him down every time he recalled his eyes. That feeling made his hair stand, and gave him nightmares for a few nights spent in the Blackstone Mountains. Ever since then, Vanskor never dared to go near the scary necromancer. He even silently swore that he would never want to see this fellow again if it was possible. Even the ruthless Vanskor was scared out of his wits, much less the rest. Soon, nobody dared to step into Sendros' tent besides Hutton. However, Sendros did not care whether anyone stepped into his tent, as he was only here with them in the Blackstone Mountains to return Cheyenne a favor. More importantly, he was here for the prophecy that had been passed down for 1,300 years in the Darkness Shrine. As for anything else, Sendros could not be bothered about it at all. Since there was no one around to disturb him, Sendros spent most of his time in meditation, but at his level, meditating was no longer just a means to recover his mana. Most importantly to Sendros, meditation was a way to let him quiet down his thoughts to focus on thinking. Juresco had long said 1,300 years ago that a legendary mage would spend most of their life thinking. This was no exaggeration at all, as thinking was the most important thing to any mage who entered the legendary realm. This was because there were too many things that required their attention. Once they entered the legendary realm, they had the right to familiarize themselves with many secrets of the world, and there were too many things that they had to think about, like the constituency of magic and the truth of the world. Thinking in itself was a journey of learning, and just as a mage apprentice thought that meditation was the most important task of all, mages thought memorizing spells was the most important thing, and for magic shooters it was studying techniques. Archmages stressed understanding the rules. It was merely the task that differed depending on which stage they were in. Like any other day, Sendros started his daily meditation after eating lunch. But just as he entered a state of meditation, Sendros opened his eyes suddenly. How can that be? His eyes were filled with disbelief, and he looked just like a child who was frightened by lightning. Luckily, Vanskor was not around, as he would never believe the fact that those snake-like eyes could express such human-like feelings. What was more unbelievable was that Sendros opened his eyes and immediately rushed out of the tent, even tripping slightly on a few chairs. Thankfully for him, he was quick to react, and while he stumbled, he did not end up falling. However, this still gave everyone a shock as they could not believe that this elderly man running frantically was really the high priest Sendros of the Darkness Shrine. How could such pure dark force exist in the world? Sendros rushed out of his tent with a panicked look as he stared fixedly in the direction of the Scar of Death with a look of shock and doubt. With his keen senses of a legendary mage, Sendros was 100% sure that the sudden burst of dark force was coming from that direction. However, even though Sendros had seen many things in his lifetime, some of which nobody would dare imagine existed, he still found it hard to believe that dark force as near perfection as this actually existed in the world of Anril. This was against the laws of the world. There was no way a force could be without a flaw. Anything as perfect as this was surely on its way to its own demise. But the dark force coming from the Scar of Death was so genuine that Sendros could clearly feel every pulse of it. It was a rhythm so perfect it was almost like music. Could that prophecy be true? The thought flashed like a ray of light in his mind, and the most powerful high priest of the Darkness Shrine was suddenly stunned. However, just as Sendros was about to use his mental strength to trace the source, this nearly perfect dark force disappeared all of a sudden. There was no sign nor trace at all, just as though it had never existed in the first place, and all of it had just been Sendros' mind playing a trick on him. Of course, Sendros knew that this was not the case. The dark force from the Scar of Death was so real and utterly clear that even though it had now disappeared, Sendros could still feel it in his soul. There is no other force that can triumph darkness in the art of concealing. Indeed, even though this nearly perfect dark force had disappeared, Sendros was not affected by it at all, and a rare smile appeared on his pale face. It was enough for Sendros to know that such a dark force existed in the world, and that the darkness in the prophecy had arrived. As for why the dark force disappeared, or where did the darkness go, none of that mattered as much. By the time Sendros returned to his tent, someone was already waiting there for quite a while. Hutton was the only one out of the whole Manhwa family who dared enter Sendros' tent. There was a friendly and respectful smile on Hutton's face. "How are you, Master Sendros?" The smile had disappeared by the time Sendros returned to his own tent. He was back to the half-alive state he had been in before. His gaze was dull and cold, and if not for the half-hearted sound he made in reply, anyone would think that he was a walking corpse. Hutton was perhaps the only exception. The first heir of the Manhwa family had a strange gift. It was as though he was naturally able to interact with everyone, even with a strange half-spirit, half-human creature like Sendros. He was still able to maintain a good relationship with him. "Oh, right. Master Sendros, how do you find it here so far?" "All right." Sendros' hostile attitude did not seem to affect Hutton at all, as the heir of the Manhwa family still maintained a friendly and respectful smile even after he faced Sendros' blatant indifference. "Hee. I'm actually here this time because I have something that I need to ask for your help with, Master Sendros." "Go ahead." For the first time, Sendros spoke more than a word in reply. This was because he had been waiting to hear this for a few days. Back when Sendros had yet to break into the legendary realm, he owed Cheyenne a favor. He tried to return the favor after he reached the legendary realm, but there was little that a legendary mage could not do, and he did not find it easy to repay Cheyenne. It had been a few decades of waiting before Cheyenne wrote to him recently, asking if he could go to the Blackstone Mountains to help his disciple at a critical moment. "This is what happened, Master Sendros. I just received a magical message from Brother Adalo that he has returned from the Scar of Death, and will reach the campsite in about an hour. However, the mage he is with seems to be a threat to the Manhwa family, hence, I was hoping that you could help us resolve this issue for the Manhwa family on account of Teacher Cheyenne." Honestly speaking, Hutton was a little in shock after he'd received the magical message from Adalo. Adalo's message had been simple, and there was nothing about the mage being a threat to the Manhwa family. All he said was that the mission had been completed, there were no casualties in the advance party, and that they would reach the Manhwa family's campsite in an hour. However, the simple message made Hutton worry as according to their plan, Adalo was supposed to have killed the advance party after retrieving the two relics so as to stop the news from spreading. there was, after all, the immortal king's treasure map amongst the relics. This was no small matter. If any news of it leaked, it would be catastrophic for the Manhwa family, who in Amril would not want to get their hands on the immortal king's treasure map. There might even be legendary realm individuals fighting for it then. Even though the Manhwa family was powerful, only Cheyenne was in the legendary realm. If a few other legendary powerhouses joined the fight, then the Manhwa family was sure to perish. Thankfully, Hutton quickly calmed down, and although he did not know much from the magical message, based on his understanding of Adalo, he was able to guess what had happened at the Scar of Death. Without question, this was all because of that President Felix. It seemed like both he and Adalo had belittled this young president. They had originally thought that with an archmage at the peak of level 17 and 2 other level 17 warriors, the young president would not be able to escape death even if he was not as weak as they thought. But, to think that Adalo was not able to kill him even with the help of 2 level 17 warriors. This meant that this young president was at least of level 18, or perhaps even level 19. It would be scary if he was a level 19. Unless his teacher Cheyenne personally stepped in, there might not be a single person in the whole Manhwa family who would be able to stop him, and even if he deployed all the elites of the Manhwa family currently in the Blackstone Mountains as well as all of the adventurers, they might not be able to win against him. A level 19 powerhouse was just one step away from the legendary realm, after all. Even if they had numerical advantage, there was no way they would be able to kill him. That was not what Hutton wanted to happen. If he was allowed to leave the Blackstone Mountains, then the Manhwa family would not only have to face powerful people who wanted the immortal king's treasure map, but would also have to face the Supreme Council's retaliation. This President Felix was personally appointed by the Supreme Council, after all, and was able to hold such an important position only in his 20s. How could he not have considerable backing? Sigh, if only Adalo could get rid of him in the Scar of Death. There were dangers everywhere in the Scar of Death anyway, and even if the young president died, Hutton could always blame it on the undead creatures or the magical beasts. A pity that both he and Adalo had belittled the young president's abilities, and the latter was thus able to leave the Scar of Death alive. The Manhwa family would not dare strike outside, as there were too many eyes watching, and if they dared do anything to the president of the Guild of Magic, it would be a provocation aimed at the Supreme Council. How many had survived after doing so in the past 1,300 years? Hence, Hutton went to Sendros instead. This was because Sendros was the most appropriate person for the job. Firstly, Sendros was powerful enough as a legendary necromancer, and would be able to get rid of that young president in a flash. Even if Felix was really one step away from the legendary realm, there was no way he would be able to take that step in his life. Furthermore, Sendros was from the Leaden Kingdom, and did not think much about the Supreme Council. This was because the Leaden Kingdom was the only country that was not under the Supreme Council's control. Even if the Supreme Council wanted to exact revenge, there was no way they could do anything to him. Of course, it was not enough with Sendros alone. He would still have to go look for Vanskor after this, and if he was able to offer enough benefits to him, this materialistic fool would most probably not disappoint him. I will. Sendros' voice was still cold and hostile, but hearing this, Hutton let out a breath of relief immediately. President Felix's fate was decided the moment Sendros agreed. If Hutton could do otherwise, he did not want to turn against the young president of the Guild of Magic, as he was too dangerous an enemy. Unfortunately, the two idiots, Harvey and Han, made a grave mistake while he was not around, and put him in a difficult position. Hence, he had no choice but to get Sendros to kill him. Thank you, Master Sendros. If there is nothing else, I shall take my leave. Sendros did not even bother answering this time as he closed his eyes and entered a state of meditation. Thankfully, Hutton was already used to this. After he left the tent respectfully, he quickly summoned Vanskor. Let's sit down and talk. One was an heir with a deep history in the underground, while the other was the head of a bandit chief who made a living by robbing and killing. Hutton and Vanskor could not be more familiar with each other. In fact, Vanskor had participated in all the Manhwa family's dealings in Dulan City and Roland City all these years. Of course, his participation was a secret as the Manhwa family traced back a long way, and they would never dare openly associate with a bandit group. Hence, not many knew that these two forces had much closer ties than it appeared on the surface. "You're in such a rush to look for me, did something happen?" "Nothing," Hutton shook his head. "I just have a small problem that I need you to help me resolve." "Tell me about it." This is what happened. Hutton did not hide anything this time, and told Vanscore about everything. "Well, besides the Immortal King's treasure map, of course. You're saying that the mage's name is Felek?" Vanscore had only heard half of it before he stood up suddenly. "Why, you know him?" "Of course I do." Vanscore's teeth were clenched in anger. "Do you remember the previous time I came to Aminya City? I told you about this unknown mage in Black Cloud's town who seemed pretty powerful, and that I was trying to get him to join the Sire Bandits." "Yeah, I do. In order to get him over to have a talk, I even sent a group of trusted men, but guess what? That bastard did not even bother with my invitation, and killed all 30-odd men. Damn it, that bastard does not respect the Sire Bandits at all. If not for your letter asking for help, I would have brought men to Black Cloud's town to teach him a lesson. Isn't that great? You won't have to make a trip to Black Cloud's town now that Felek will arrive at the campsite in about an hour's time. You can do whatever you wish then." Hutton lowered his voice, and added, "Also, Master Sendros will be helping out as well, so don't worry about this Felek escaping." "Sendros?" Vanscore could not help feeling a chill run down his spine when he heard this name. Honestly speaking, it would be an honor for Vanscore to fight alongside a legendary mage, but why did it have to be Sendros? There was no trace of life in this man, and he was a creature that seemed more like a corpse than a human. Even looking at him gave Vanscore nightmares, much less fighting alongside him. When he thought of how scary Sendros was, Vanscore could not help but grumble at Hutton, fancy doubting what the Sire Bandits were capable of after having worked together for so many years. He had even brought all the elites of the Sire Bandits in order to help Hutton this time, and they would be more than enough to deal with 10 mages, much less a young mage in his 20s. Why did he have to bring that monster Sendros into the picture? Master Sendros has already agreed. Hutton could tell what this ruthless bandit was thinking with just one look, but he could not explain anything to Vanscore in such circumstances, and thus that was all that he could say. Vanscore lost his voice after hearing that. There was no way he could say no to this. Who was Sendros, after all? A necromancer in the legendary realm, and the most powerful high priest of the Darkness Shrine. Who would dare go against his words? They would have to be tired of living. Vanscore was both happy and afraid when he walked out of the tent, happy because he would finally have a chance to vent his anger, and afraid of the monster that was Sendros at the same time. While gathering his men, Vanscore could not help but think that he would be plagued by nightmares for a while after this. Vanscore was indeed a good working partner as he had brought along almost all the elites of the Sire Bandits to help the Manhwa family. There were over 300 men, and they were all above level 10, including a dozen who were above level 15. They were a formidable force no matter where they were. All 300+ men were bandits who were experienced with breaking into homes, and thus they were naturals at sneak attacks. Vanscore only used 10 minutes to arrange everything, and soon, the road leading from the Scar of Death to the campsite was covered with traps. As the sky darkened and the blood-red sun sank beneath the horizons, all the bandits held their breath as they waited quietly for the fight to start. There were suddenly another dozen or so figures along the rocky mountain road of the Scar of Death. "Mage Felek, thank you so much for your help and for letting me copy down the treasure map of the Immortal King. I'll be sure to tell my teacher Cheyenne everything when we get back." Adelo thanked him continuously as he had owed him a huge favor indeed. After all, this mage Felek could very well have taken both relics at the Scar of Death and killed Adelo and the other 2 warriors. No choice. The difference between their strength was too huge indeed, so there was no way they could have defended themselves. A legendary mage and a humorous WYRM, that was power far beyond what an archmage like him could comprehend. The legendary mage did not even have to lift a finger, either, as all he had to do was to summon the humorous Wyrm, and they would be smashed to pieces. Luckily, this mage Felix was merciful indeed. He did not attack them after getting both relics, and even graciously allowed him to replicate the map. It seemed like he would have to tell Hutton that this mage Felix was a man worthy winning over. It would be worth any price they had to pay if they could do it. Oh, right, he would have to get Hutton to teach his brother a lesson this time. That was a stupid move on Harvey's part indeed. How could he offend him without making sure whom he was dealing with? He almost got himself into huge trouble. Thank goodness that this mage Felix was merciful, and did not take what Harvey and Han did to heart. Mage Felix, you're very gracious indeed. Attila was in a good mood, and could not help praising the man in his heart again. You're too kind, Mage Attila. Lin Li had a humble smile on his face, but he already sent a warlock's eyes to scan the surroundings of the rocky mountain road. After he reached level 19 in the fight with the Lich, Lin Li realized that his mental strength became much more sensitive. It was as though he suddenly had another pair of eyes, allowing him to react quickly to whatever happened around him, just like earlier, when he stepped on the rocky mountain road, for he could already sense that there were hundreds of pairs of eyes staring him down, full of malicious intent. Lin Li would not feel it so clearly in the past, but after he reached level 19, all of this could be seen clearly by him. He could even tell for certain how powerful the owners of those eyes were. Under his control, the warlock's eyes swept through the bushes at an incredible speed, and it was only a moment before it detected nearly 10 traps ahead of them. So much effort too. Lin Li chatted with Attila as though nothing was happening while he silently praised them in his mind. Much effort had been put into making these traps indeed. Unfortunately, this effort was misplaced. While these traps stood a chance against an average person, they were useless against a level 19 archmage, terribly futile. Lin Li was perfectly capable of destroying all of them with just a snap of his fingers. The only reason he did not do so was because he was in no rush. He thought that it was too time-consuming to seek them out one by one. Why not just wait for all of them to reveal themselves? Of course, he could pull a few tricks to make them reveal themselves faster. It was about 200 to 300 meters away from the road leading to the Scar of Death. This was where the first toxic fume trap was laid, right at the end of the road. When Lin Li neared the trap, he coincidentally tripped on a rock, and fell unceremoniously. Then, a pop was heard before greenish toxic fumes started spreading along the mountain road, and covered the surroundings in a pungent stench. Lin Li was entirely engulfed by the fumes as he was right at the front. Then, a piercing sound followed as hundreds of arrows flew towards the green toxic fumes. Attila had been walking alongside Lin Li, but just as they were reaching the trap, Lin Li picked up his pace and created a gap of a few meters between the two. It was only because of this gap that Attila had been spared from the burst of toxic fumes. When the hundreds of arrows came firing, Attila conjured up a frost shield, and thus even though he was the nearest to Lin Li, he was left unscathed even after the violent attacks. Mage Felix, are you all right? Attila's face was pale, and his voice trembled as he already guessed who was behind these attacks. The Manhwa family's campsite was less than 300 meters away. Given how cautious Hutton was, how would he allow anyone else to set up a trap here? Attila was willing to bet his life that this attack was permitted by Hutton. Attila was ready to die at this moment. What was Hutton thinking? How could he think of attacking now, and even use such terrible methods? He was dealing with a legendary individual who'd got rid of a lich by himself. What good would such terrible methods do besides angering him? Unfortunately, it was all too late now as the terrible ambush had become reality, and Attila could not stop it even if he wanted to. He could only pray that this merciful young mage could be merciful yet again and forgive Hutton for being a fool. However, just as Attila was praying, a strong wind started blowing within the green fumes, and Attila heard the young mage he thought merciful begin chanting. Then, Attila saw a beautiful snowflake. Nobody knew how many icicles sliced through the air in that instant as a piercing sound rang out, sending a chill down their spines. The crystal-clear icicles painted an ethereal picture against the backdrop of a blood-red evening sun, yet beneath the facade of this ethereal beauty were heart-wrenching cries. There was originally woodland with short shrubs at the end of the mountain path. It was jade green, but as the beautiful snowflakes fell on it, the picturesque jade green was painted with spots of bright red, almost as if a careless artist had splattered paint on his canvas. The scary thing was that these bright red spots were growing in numbers at a frightening speed, and in a split second, more than half of the jade green had been covered in bright red. The word quieted down all of a sudden, and it was as if time stood still at that instant. Everyone was shocked by the gruesome sight as they knew that every bright red spot meant that a life had been lost to the icicles. They were unable to imagine how many people had to have died to the icicles in that short period of time for half of the hill to be painted bright red. Lin Li was the only who knew that there were 137 of them. That was the difference between level 18 and level 19. While a level 18 archmage was powerful, their mental strength was somewhat slower, but this would all change once they reached level 19. Their mental strength was now akin to another eye for them, and an incredibly sharp one at that. They would be able to clearly tell what was going on with just a glance. In that split second, there were 137 arrows fired at him, hence, Lin Li released 137 icicles. The arrows fell on the floor, just as the icicles pierced their chest. None of the 137 people ambushing him were spared, all of them lost their lives in that split second. Such was the power of a level 19 archmage. Once a mage attained this level, it would be hard to ambush them as their incredibly sensitive mental strength would be capable of detecting and locating anyone harboring ill intent towards them. The bandits might have been able to live for another 10 minutes had they not made the first move. They were the elites of the Sire bandits, after all, and there were over 300 of them. Lin Li would have to take some time to search for them one by one. Unfortunately, the moment they released their arrows was also the moment they handed their lives over to the Grim Reaper. It had not taken more than a few seconds from the moment Lin Li stumbled upon the toxic fume trap to the moment the bandits were killed. Everything had happened so quickly that nobody was able to react in time. To put it simply, the greenish toxic fumes had yet to dissipate even when half the mountain was painted a bright red. It was at this moment that Adalo knew that he had made a mistake, a grave mistake. Adalo was the one who had interacted the most with Lin Li after the advance party entered the Scar of Death. While everyone held their guard up at first and plotted against each other, even getting into minor conflicts at times, Adalo still had a relatively good impression of this young mage when they left the Scar of Death. Truth be told, the young mage had put on an impeccable facade in the Scar of Death as he was always calm, while his attitude was never overbearing or cowardly in any sense. However, it was his gentle and friendly smile that had left a lasting impression on Adalo, as it felt like he was meeting an old friend when he was with Lin Li. He never had to worry about accidentally provoking him. It was that same delusion that led Adalo to think that he would still be magnanimous and forgive Hutton when the ambush happened. However, the mountain slope painted in red reminded Adalo once again that this was no old friend of his, but a powerful mage who had defeated a lich. Adalo finally realized that he was wrong. This young mage was definitely nowhere as gentle and friendly as he seemed to be. Even though he still had a smile on his face, there was not a trace of pity or hesitation in his eyes, and he looked just like a seasoned executioner as he took more than 100 lives in mere moment. And the most terrifying thing was that this executioner did not look like he was going to stop after taking those lives. He held the magic staff with the huge gem at the tip and slowly walked out from the toxic fume trap while 4 solar spheres of yellow, blue, red, and green circled around him quickly. Once he saw the 4 solar spheres, Adalo knew immediately that this young mage was out for blood. Those 4 solar spheres were the ultimate form of the earth, water, fire, and wind 4-element shields. That was a level 19 elemental shield, and purely in terms of defense, was equal to at least 10 source shields. Only legendary level magic or a blow from a sword sage would be able to penetrate the elemental shield. However, the elemental shield required more than 10 times the mana expenditure compared to a source shield. When a mage used an elemental shield, it meant that he was about to do something big. The toxic fumes still had yet to dissipate, but with the elemental shield, Lin Li did not even fear archmage level magic, much less that bit of toxic fumes. Hence, Lin Li walked right through the toxic fumes without giving them a second look. You idiots, what are you waiting for? Start moving and get rid of this fellow. Vanskor was scared silly, and only managed to come back to his senses now, yelling wildly while he retrieved his crossbow from his back. Perhaps it was because of Vanskor's orders, or the fear of imminent death, but after hearing Vanskor's yelling, the equally stunned sire bandits all came to life at once, roaring. Thousands of arrows sliced through the air as they came flying towards Lin Li like a swarm of flies. At the same time, about 30 mages hidden behind the mountain started chanting. Unfortunately, none of this held any meaning in front of a level 19 mage. The 4 solar spheres circled quickly as they formed an impenetrable shield around Lin Li, rendering the swarm of arrows and magic hurled at him useless. The arrows clattered as they fell to the ground, and the magic was engulfed by the shield in an instant while Lin Li continued walking through the toxic fumes and up the mountain amidst the torrential attacks. Don't you dare stand back, all of you move at once and get rid of this fellow. Vanskor's yells continued to resonate on the mountain slope, and the torrential attacks continued pouring down on Lin Li, yet none of this seemed to exist to Lin Li. Then, the gem on the ether staff suddenly glowed. The stunned bandits were unable to react before they were hit by the gory stench of blood, which was then followed by pathetic cries. A bandit who was well concealed in the shrubs did not even have time to struggle before a blood-red vine coiled tightly around him. Then, it was followed by 2 and then 3 vines, until there were dozens of vines coiled around him. In the blink of an eye, this unlucky bandit was covered in at least a few dozen vines that coiled tightly around him, covering him from head to toe without a single gap. The vines then grew and dragged him over until he was in front of Lin Li. With a wave of his hand, the vines loosened, and revealed the terrified bandit. Sire bandits again? Lin Li knew immediately by looking at his armor that it was the bandit group ranked in the top 10 in the breezy plains. You. Help. This bandit was unlucky indeed as he had just crawled out from the mess of vines, only to see that it was the scary mage before him. He had got out of the frying pan, only to fall into fire indeed. Thus, he cried for help without thinking twice in the midst of his shock and devastation. Shut up. Lin Li frowned while lowering the ether staff in his hand, and with a dull thud, the unlucky bandit fainted on the spot. After knocking out the unlucky bandit, Lin Li turned around to look at the people wildly attacking him. One of them was a tough-looking man with a crossbow in one hand and a machete in the other, screaming hysterically. Lin Li secretly guessed that he had to be Vanskor, who had been summoning him repeatedly. I'm in luck. Lin Li looked at Vanskor from afar, and suddenly smiled. Honestly speaking, Lin Li was very happy to bump into the Sire bandits, who had attacked Black Cloud's town twice. Even if he had not met them here, he would have searched them out in the Dragon Mountains and got rid of this bandit group that dared challenge the authority of the Tower of Dusk. For a force to become one to be reckoned with, it would have to be done at the expense of getting rid of another in a place like the breezy plains. Lin Li already had his eyes on Sire bandits as they were quite well known in the breezy plains, and did not have a complicated background. On top of that, they were not too powerful. Lin Li could not think of a better target than the Sire bandits even after racking his brains. And to add on to that, they had attacked Black Cloud's town twice, and left a terrible impression on him. The Sire bandits would meet a horrible end, be it for official reasons or his personal vendetta. This was great, he had not even had the time to seek them out himself, and they came to him instead. But there are too many people. It'll be bothersome for me to do this myself, Lin Li muttered to himself before retrieving an oil lamp from his pocket. The bandits were all on the verge of breakdown at this point, but the most depressing thing on earth was not some ruthless demon lord, but annoying pests. Even though Lin Li had killed more than 100 men right from the start and frightened the whole Sire bandits, they did not collapse entirely, as they knew that Lin Li was scarily powerful, and they would not have a chance to escape. Hence, all they could do was to grit their teeth and fight it out with him. However, once the bandits realized that they could not harm him at all no matter what they did, their initial resolution started to waver. The feeling of futility spread like an epidemic and infected all of them. They started to panic and lose hope, and began to look for ways to escape. If not for the presence of Vanscore, the remaining 200-some bandits would have been reduced to an army of headless chickens. But even Vanscore was unable to prevent the breakdown of the bandits. The last straw was a cloud of black fog that started spreading. A cloud of black fog started appearing after Lin Li channeled his mental strength into the oil lamp, and the space around the mountain slope contorted weirdly. Before they could figure out what kind of magic this was, a deafening growl shook up the place. My God! Monster, it's a monster. Good heavens, what kind of a creature is this? Run, my brothers. The humorous WYRM was at least a few dozen meters long, and took up half the space on the mountain slope the minute it appeared. As it spread its bony wings, it took up the other half of the space on the mountain slope. Apart from Vanscore, the rest was at most at level 15, and some of them were only at level 10. How could they have seen anything as scary as a humorous WYRM? They had initially planned on holding out for a little more, but as soon as the humorous WYRM appeared, they broke down completely. In an instant, their cries for help intensified. The bandits were scared out of their wits, leaving their weapons to run for their lives. They feared that the terrifying creature would catch up with them. What a pity that they would never outrun a humorous WYRM's ice flame, given their abilities. After letting out a deafening growl, the humorous WYRM opened its mouth, and the mountain slope was soon covered in its ice flames. The humorous WYRM's ice flame was so powerful that even a level 17 archmage like Adalo nearly fell prey to it, much less these level 10 bandits. All they saw was a blue light sweeping over the mountain slope before dozens of ice sculptures appeared. This was a massacre, as the level 20 humorous WYRM was in itself an undefeatable existence. Even the level 18 Vanscore was insignificant in the face of the humorous WYRM, much less the other bandits. Moreover, Vanscore was unable to do anything as he was bound by Lin Li's gravity spell. Even though Vanscore was a powerful level 18 warrior, he was unable to retaliate before he was bound by Lin Li using a gravity spell. This was not unusual, as Lin Li was indeed terrifyingly powerful, as he had benefited a lot from the fights in the Scar of Death. While he was still a level 19 archmage in terms of strength, he was comparable to legendary mages in many other ways. Coupled with his seemingly endless mana and mental strength, Lin Li was only a step away from the legendary realm at this point. Purely in terms of combat abilities, Lin Li was definitely the most powerful in the whole of Anral apart from the legendary realm individuals, and this was merely in terms of his own combat abilities. He might even be able to go against those in the legendary realm if he used both the holy light and gloomy dark as well. This was way beyond what a level 18 warrior like Vanscore was capable of going against, and it was merely a matter of wasting more energy for Lin Li. Good evening, Mr. Vanscore. I didn't think we would meet in such circumstances. After binding Vanscore using a gravity spell, Lin Li was in no hurry to make a move, hence, he happily struck a conversation with the bandit leader. What? What do you want? Half of his most elite men had died, and he was now bound by magic. It was no wonder that Vanscore's usually calm demeanor was nowhere to be seen. Vanscore was filled with utter regret after seeing for himself how powerful this young mage was. If he'd known it would come to this, he would never have sent men to harass Black Cloud's town. To think that he had thought that this young man was a rising talent, and had even thought of buying him over for the Sire bandits. He had to have been blind, and should have known better than to mess with this young mage after he killed 30 of his men. Why had he not realized it earlier? To think that he'd even volunteered to help Hutton get rid of him. Look where this brought him? Even though he finally knew how powerful this young mage was, he had already paid too heavy a price. All of over 300 elites of the Sire bandits were going to die here, and even if he did make it out alive of the Blackstone Mountains, the Sire bandits would have lost their position as one of the top 10 bandit groups in the Breezy Plains. Calm down, Mr. Vanscore. I just want to ask you something. What is it? Vanscore's heart skipped a beat as his initially dull gaze suddenly brightened up. He already knew what kind of a person he was going against even before the fight. This mage was unusually ruthless, and even though he was young, he was a seasoned executioner who did not hesitate to kill. Vanscore never thought that he would make it out alive if he were to ever fall in the hands of such a person. But this person seemed to be asking something from him. This discovery made Vanscore heave a sigh in relief, as this made everything easier. While he was merely a bandit leader, he had accumulated considerable wealth after all those years, and would be able to give Lin Li a satisfactory answer regardless of whether it was wealth or equipment that he desired. If Lin Li was still not pleased, Vanscore could well give him everything he had. It was alright, nothing was more important than staying alive. As long as he was still alive, it was only a matter of time before he would get it all back. He would not even have to wait long. All he had to do was make it alive to the Dragon Mountains, where he could agree to Master Lucen's terms. As long as he had the help of Master Lucen, he would be able to take back everything he had lost, even the life of this young mage. It's nothing much, actually. Lin Li had no idea what Vanscore was thinking, and he did not care about it, either. Why would he bother with whatever a dying man was thinking? Rest assured that if it is anything I own, I will give it to you without any hesitation as long as you'll let me go. I can even give you the whole of Dragon Mountains. There is a treasure cove that I've had for over a decade, and you can easily buy half of Duland with all the riches inside, Vanscore hurriedly added, fearing that Lin Li would change his mind. Alright. Since you're so generous, Mr. Vanscore, I will cut to the chase. I'm interested in taking over your men. Well, I've got no choice, you see, I was forced to become the president of some guild, and there are matters that I'm unable to see to myself. So, I'm going to need some help, but then there's a problem. As you know, your men are immensely loyal to you, and may not listen to my orders, so I'd like to discuss with you to see if I can threaten them with your death. Vanscore's face paled, and he suddenly channeled all of his combat energy to try and break free from the gravity spell. Unfortunately, his struggle was too late. Just as he channeled all his combat energy, a blood-red vine crept up his neck. And thus, the combat energy of a level 18 warrior eventually lost to a tiny blood vine. The thorn in the heart of Roland City and the head of one of the most powerful bandit groups in the breezy plains had been vanquished by a tiny blood vine. The killing on the mountain slope came to stop just as Vanscore took his last breath. Only 10 of the over 300 bandits were spared. Even then, they were spared only because Lin Li had given the humorous WYRM orders to do so, allowing them to leave the Blackstone Mountains alive. It was because Lin Li needed people to bring the message back to the Dragon Mountains. Lin Li could not care less as to what reaction the people at the Dragon Mountains would have to such a message, because he had more important matters to see to at the moment. Hey, wake up, the sun's shining on you. After turning the whole Sire bandits upside down, Lin Li was in no hurry to return to the Manhwa family's campsite. Instead, he kicked the unlucky bandit who had fallen next to him. After a few consecutive kicks from Lin Li, the unlucky bandit finally woke up, but his sight was still blurry as he was out for a while. Of course, that did not last long, as he quickly realized who had kicked him awake. The unlucky bandit paled as soon as he saw Lin Li. It's you. Why, you know me? The unlucky bandit did not even dare to look at the smiling man as he buried his head and gulped with difficulty, hesitating for a while before he chose to answer truthfully. Why yes. Tell me about it. You once took off my pants in Black Cloud's town. Thank you for watching Mystic Realms Recap. Please like, share and subscribe. Have a great day.